Hey there guys, Spazzy Dragon here, aka Syndromes, and welcome to this little video. I like space-themed games. I'm sure that doesn't really surprise anyone given the nature and in fact the beginnings of my channel, but it was still personally a very strange feeling when I submitted my first two videos involving Star Citizen. Star Citizen, as anyone who knows me from Disco might tell you, is a game that I never liked, and let's not beat around the bush, it's a game that I actually had a pretty sizable bias against. Which is really strange because until 3 weeks ago, I haven't actually played the game or owned the game in any way. So how does that work? In order to explain why I would mark a game for death even though I'd never personally played it, we have to go back to the year of 2012 when it was first announced. To provide context, during this time I was already a member Discovery freelancer for over 4 years, and apart from Roll of Tanks, it was the only other multiplayer game that I constantly played, and Disco in general was also the only community that I was actively participating in. Now, during that time, Disco actually became the only game I could play on the account of my PC dying, and being in a financially strained situation at the time, especially as a student without a job, I was left with my netbook. You know, a netbook, those tiny little laptops with Intel Atom processors that couldn't even run GTA Vice City on 60? Yeah, so when Star Citizen was announced, I watched the community react to it and already saw some people, including devs, planning to see how we could migrate Disco over to it. Now, in retrospect, of course, the subject of, quote, migrating Disco to a different platform is a well-traveled one and a fruitless one indeed, but at the time, for me personally, it was a huge deal. There was just no way I could buy myself a new PC, and honestly, I was afraid that I would be left behind. So, being the mature, early 20-something that I was, I slung so much shit at it that I actually took unprecedented happiness when I heard the game was suffering some sort of misfortunes later down the line. But today, as I record this video in late 2019, I'm almost 30, I have a well-paying job and a good life, I have a gaming rig with more firepower than I could have ever possibly need, and I still have yet to play a good half of my Steam library even once. And Discovery Freelancer for me today is nothing more but a collection of admittedly nice, but still rose-tinted memories from something that happened more than 10 years ago. At this point in time, I have no reason to dislike nor not to play Star Citizen, so when my PlanetSide 2 outfit decided to get into it, I somewhat begrudgingly followed, and soon enough I had an Aurora package of my own. Really, if you wanted me to summarize my current experience with Star Citizen without going into details, then all I can say is that Star Citizen is an amazing tech demo, and yes, that title comes with the obvious negative associations with it. With the current version at the time of me making this video being 3.7, with first-person mining being the latest edition, Star Citizen is currently, for me, perceived as a nicely presented scaffolding for a much bigger game that at this point in time may or may not be a reality at some point. You will notice that I hesitate to use the term potential because it's a very slippery one. More on that in just a bit. I do not know what I expected when I went into the game, especially since I never cared about Star Citizen enough to actually look at any of the gameplay videos or whatever, but what I thought I would get was something similar to what Paradox usually does with their games. They release a minimum shippable product, which is a very bare-bonesy-esque kind of affair, and then they start releasing DLC modules which enhance the experience until the install weighs 10 times more than the base game. For example, what they did with CK2 and Stellaris, two games that I actually enjoy, so I wasn't opposed to that sort of idea. But, of course, this was not the case with Star Citizen. In this case, this is, as I already put it, a scaffolding for a game that Star Citizen at some point will become. And just like scaffolding, it tends to wobble if you put too much pressure on it. I know a lot of people who enjoy Star Citizen, but whenever I brought up my issues with them, they would usually respond in a very similar manner, something to the sense of, what do you expect from an alpha build, just wait until they add to it. And in which case I would reply, I would expect at least some sort of polish regarding some basic game mechanics before they start adding new stuff on top of it. It all really comes back to the word potential, and I cannot think of a better way to describe my issue with it, and by extension Star Citizen, than how Mr. Regular from RCR explains it in one of his car reviews, where he talks about a new generation of a previously okay vehicle, and what the designers focused on in order to appease the customers. have a listen.
Potential. Boasters and boys with weak self-images love to have potential because potential is a value that never has to be proven. Oh, you have the potential to be a rally driver. You know, you have the potential to be a great musician. You have the potential to get great grades. Potential is great because you can play Minecraft all day and never have to cash it in. You won't cash it in. You won't cash your potential in. What is potential? Potential is wasted energy. Potential is wasted energy. That's what my band director said in real life. He said it to us in the catacombs of Giant Stadium in 1996 before all chapter championships. Potential is wasted energy. I want to see what you're capable of. I don't want to think what you left behind. And the Honda S2000 is a car for resting on your Abercrombie jeans and forging your parents' signature on a bad report card which has the comments "does not work up to ability." As long as all of the power lies hidden in the top 10% of the rev range, the S2000 can hide from criticism behind a wall built by message board white knights.
And just like the S2000, Star Citizen is hiding behind the potential of being an amazing space simulator in the future, all the while it's currently making these odd design choices. Now let me backtrack a little bit and explain it that it's not like Star Citizen devs aren't actually working towards that potential, whatever it may be. I came around to Star Citizen right after the FPS mining mechanic was being implemented, and even a newbie like me could tell me that it was a huge new addition that adds to the gameplay in a positive way, not only how people make credits, but also how lawful and unlawful interaction works between players. My problem with all of this is that it's the metaphorical giant gift box placed on top of a table with very wonky legs. I like participating in this new activity, I really do, but I would also like to set a waypoint to it without having to reset it 7 times because the quantum drive doesn't calibrate when I aim my ship at it. Or how about a 3D map that doesn't zoom into an empty space unless you double-click on an existing object? That'd be nice as well. So would be a simple list on the side that shows all existing objects, preferably with some sort of filter, or even better, a search bar so I can find my destination manually if I need to. Or when I'm perusing ship gear, I'd love to at least have an item grayed out if my current active ship is not compatible with it before I dump half of my existing credits into it. Or have a HUD actually mention the name of a player that you have currently selected, rather than a 3D model of their ship, which is only useful for me if I'm in combat. Or how about a retrograde marker so I can do a 180 and use my main engines to stop without having to push off course and into an asteroid that I wasn't even aimed at? Or what about the ability of players to damage you and your ship when you're inside of an armistice zone simply by ramming you or by shooting into it from the outside? You'll notice that none of these are bugs, but rather they are inconsiderate design choices. But that's my point. I really do mean that the way that a player interacts with the game needs to be polished first, so that I don't have to mentally steel myself every single time I open the Moby glass. The user interface is just way too clunky for the level of detail the game currently has. The 3D map offers nothing that cannot be done in 2D due to the already 2D nature of orbits around stars and stellar bodies such as planets, except, of course, the planets themselves, but even there you could have just have a fixed 3D view of only the planet, if you selected on it, and all the known waypoints on it, and then alternatively a list on the side of the screen, allowing you to select your destination manually on the 3D sphere itself or from the list. Even NPC missions are problematic. I have to keep guessing where a target on a bounty mission is because the mission description does not tell me until I accept it, even if the target is just an NPC, which is fair enough, but at least the stupid situations where a 10,000 credit contract is located in a nearby area and can be reached for me under 2 minutes, whereas a similar 8,000 contract will involve a 12 million quantum drive travel, which might take up to 10 minutes to a different area. And traveling in general seems to be very strangely designed. What it is just timer. You set your destination, you spool up your drive, and then it's just 10 minutes of staring at a flight bubble effect. During this time you cannot even stand up from your pilot seat to do something else. Even if you are interdicted by an NPC ambush or an obstruction, all you have to do is re-spool your drive and enter the jump again. Nothing to it. A timer A plain timer is something that I would expect from a mobile game, not a AAA release. What it begs for is some sort of alternative mechanic that runs in parallel, that cuts down on the time of flight more than half, but it would require some sort of constant manual input from the player, such as jumping from point to point to points in a space version of Current, or something similar. Just not this. Yeah, okay, I'll stop. 8,500 characters on the script so far, and I've whinged myself inside out about my issues with this thing, but look, don't get me wrong, I don't actually dislike Star Citizen. Actually, the fact that I'm even making this video in the first place is proof enough that I genuinely care about this project, and even though I do have some non-bug related issues with it in its current state, I really want to see what happens to it, because flimsy footing aside, they've managed to give me a very unique experience, even in its current flawed and unfinished state, and it's an experience that until now I didn't even know that I lacked. You see, I don't exactly remember where I heard the term, and I quote, the mundanity of fantasy, end quote, being used first, but it's a very weird feeling to describe. Star Citizen, the way I imagined it to be at first, was about flying spaceships and then all of the assorted stuff that goes with that task. But I was actually amazed as to how much detail they put it into that I described as associated stuff. You see, in fantasy, just by its definition, we tend to focus on the more fantastical elements, perhaps a little bit too much. So when some sort of everyday, end quote, mundane activities are taking place, then they tend to stand out, and then they seem to be almost as important as their fantasy counterparts. When you log into Star Citizen, you wake up in the bed in the station that you visited last. And it's this very tiny, unimpressive room with bare amenities in many cases, but you can go look around and take into the detail that went into this room alone. Comparing this to Freelancer, where the planet-side interaction is really nothing more than an animated background when you sit through the trade goods store or the equipment dealer, or, you know, apart from the barn and everything. But otherwise, the moment you log into that game, you can just slam your takeoff key and be spat into the game world and given control of your ship within seconds. But here in Star Citizen, you get up, you make sure that your suit and helmet is equipped, you exit the chambers into the living area, which is just a ginormous collection of, you know, hundreds of these tiny little chambers. And even this area is modeled to seem completely rational, and really feels like a functioning place with hundreds of residents, not just you. At that point, interacting with your spaceship is physically impossible. Instead, you have to go to the customs area where the ship consoles are located and have the station crew, and get this, get your ship out of the station's storage, assigned a landing pad, and prepared for departure. Depending on how many actual players there are during this time, this might actually take a little while. But that's the odd thing that I really enjoy about Star Citizen so far. During this time, I could just sit down on one of the chairs, pull up my Mobi Glass, and take a look at some of the contracts. Or maybe I will just go and visit the equipment shops. Having to move around like this in first person is a very interesting alternative to what seems that previously was just a separate window. And it's a very unique experience for me because there's no rush to it, because nobody is going to rush things for you. Even when you get onto that ship, you still need to wait for it to warm up, for the shields to recharge, for example. And yes, I know that it's nothing more than mundane actions and busy work, but it gives an impression that there is just more to the portrayal of this game world than just the space shooter that it first seems to be. So when I finally do lift off, I know that for whatever was going on that station will continue going on without me. That it has a life of its own regardless of my participation. That if I leave that area, it does not cease to exist. This is a stark contrast to what I'm used to when I see a station or a planet in, say, Discovery Freelancer, which at that point is really nothing more than a multiplayer equivalent of a pause button. It allows me to just dock in safety and just chill for a few seconds, and then just lift off with another click of my button. I really do think that the name Star Citizen is, honestly speaking, spot on, because your experience encompasses more than just spaceship flight, even though it is just nothing more than a set dressing, and the way that the game has presented it certainly earns my gratitude. What I really hope to see, though, are more space-faring NPCs to provide that sort of sense of interstellar traffic. Patrols, convoys, random civvies flying around in shuttles, stuff like that. I also might be a little bit too comfortable with the faction system the Freelancer has, but they are so very memorable in that sense, and you kind of need to piece together their descriptions of lore by small chunks instead of just a huge exposition dump. But again, Star Citizen is far from being finished, and nothing that I'm going to say now is really going to matter in a few months anyway as it changes. But then again, this is just a first impressions video for me to look back on in a year or two. But yeah, that's it for this video. I've talked about Star Citizen a lot on Discord, and I was told a couple of times that I was giving off this kind of very split and contradiction impression. So this video is mostly a in-depth answer as to what and how and why. Needless to say that my thoughts on Star Citizen have changed since whatever years ago, and even though it's still too unfinished for me to judge and talk about it as a game, I will still tell you that if they manage to pull this thing off, it will certainly be worth your time and interesting. This is Spazzy Dragon aka Syndromes. Fly safe.